Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is HannahsBooks. Well, I got sucked in again by Steve Donoghue's March of the Penguins. Last week, he made me read Hesiod, just so I could talk a bit about theogony and works and days. I was shocked to see that more than one of you seemed to be willing to watch a second video about Hesiod. Yes, I know a lot of my viewers would prefer to hear about the not quite so old books I usually talk about on this channel, and I promise that kind of talk will be back very soon. But hearing Steve say that Virgil doesn't charm him made me want to talk about Virgil too. I know that taking the stage on this after Steve Donoghue did might be a really awful idea, especially since I read the Aeneid for the first time just a few years ago. Let me tell you the story. When my homeschool son began to read sections from Virgil's Aeneid, back when he was taking Latin during his high school years, I was determined that if he could read Virgil, then I could as well. Of course, I chose to read it in English. After looking through an assortment of translations, while the two of us sat on the floor of the county library, I chose two: the 2005 Lombardo translation and the 2006 Fagles translation. Let me mention that the audiobook of the Fagles is fantastic, read by Simon Callow. When I share quotes with you today, I'll alternate between the two, letting you know which translator I'm using, so you'll get a feel for both. Incidentally, next time I read the Aeneid, I really want to try out the 2009 translation by Sarah Rudin, a translation which will proudly join Caroline Alexander's Iliad and Emily Watson's Odyssey. And if you're looking for a beautifully illustrated version of the Aeneid for young people, be sure to check out the version by Penelope Lively. I'll link all of them below. And while I'm talking about translations of the ancients made by female translators, let me mention one more thing. While Roz doesn't talk specifically about the Aeneid, don't miss the fantastic discussion of female characters in ancient and ancient-adjacent literature on her channel, Scallydandling About the Books. I'll link to her video below as well. I will readily admit that at first I found myself struggling to follow some of what Virgil was saying. I generally think of text as a transparent window into another world, but barriers in the Aeneid kept that window a bit shaded. References to Roman names kept me turning to the glossary, especially as the book started, and also in Book 6, the underworld scene. Incidentally, Fagles' notes are more extensive and more helpful than Lombardo's, and that might matter to you a lot if you're new to the Aeneid like I was. Anyway, after just one afternoon of reading, I was stunned to realize how many stories and names and phrases in our culture come from Virgil's Aeneid. Not quite like the King James Bible or like Shakespeare, but still. From the Aeneid comes everything from the idea of rumors flying to specific phrases like Greeks bearing gifts. Yes, the story of the Trojan horse, not mentioned in the Iliad, is fully told here. In contrast to Steve, I was also surprised how poetic the book is. I did already know that Virgil used the Homeric rhythm of dactylic hexameter to write his epic. But the more I thought about the idea of borrowing a meter developed for the Greek language to write a long work in Latin, the more I realized how conscious of the rigors of language Virgil must have been. What I didn't expect was the beauty of his similes, the depth of his images, and even the deep emotions he sometimes expresses. And what struck me the most was the degree to which Virgil's Aeneid seems so modern at times. Yes, like Homer, Virgil assumes that the drama acted out by the central human characters is often because the script is constructed by the gods. But the range of emotions played out by the characters, especially Aeneas and Dido, really feels immediate to me. Wars and a man I sing. begins Fagel's translation. With this phrase, Virgil announces his homage to Homer. The Aeneid is a book that echoes both Homeric epics, the Iliad, wars, and the Odyssey, and a man. In contrast to Homer, however, we have here not the Greek side, but the Trojan. By connecting his nationalistic myth to the Homeric epics, Virgil suggests a sense of inevitability to the founding of Rome. He places the Aeneid into the long flow of time, both literally and literarily. Rome starts feeling like a grand culmination of all of the great history and literature that came before. The first 6 books track the basic storyline of the Odyssey. Aeneid recounts the story of the end of the Trojan War, as well as his travels afterwards. There's a difference. As Odysseus winds his weary way home, Aeneas travels into the unknown, fated to found a new home. The last 6 books in the Aeneid track the Iliad, with Aeneas slaughtering the native people of Italy in order to found the Roman Empire. Manifest destiny, anyone? My favorite chapter in Virgil's Aeneid is Book 4, as it seems might also be a favorite of Steve's. Here in this chapter is the great love affair between Aeneas and Queen Dido of Carthage, with whom he finds refuge from the storms at sea after he leaves Troy. Like Aeneas, it's been Dido's fate to leave her original home in order to found a new homeland for herself and her people. While hearing Aeneas tell the story of the end of the Trojan War and his subsequent journeying, Dido falls in love with him. What could be better than to read a good story about someone falling in love with a good storyteller? In some ways, Dido echoes characters like Calypso and Circe in Homer's Odyssey. Just as they did, Dido serves as the love interest who delays the hero's fated journey towards home. But Virgil gives Dido a kind of emotional depth, which is totally lacking in Homer's women, even Penelope. Her love for Aeneas becomes a desperate passion, and I'm convinced that we readers are meant to see her great pain and identify with it. Of course, the depth of her feelings are not quite real. The goddesses Venus and Juno have collaborated to curse her, and Aeneas certainly loves Dido back, although perhaps without quite as much of the goddess-inspired self-destructive passion that burns in Dido. One of the most beautiful scenes in Book 4 is when Dido and Aeneas, along with others, are out riding horses. An enormous rainstorm blows in and then turns to hail. All scatter and seek shelter. Here's the quote from Lombardo, the translation I'll follow for all the quotes from chapter 4. And Dido and the Trojan leader make their way to the same cave. Earth herself and bridal Juno give the signal. Fires flash in the sky, witness to their nuptials. No longer is Dido swayed by appearances or her good name. No more does she contemplate a secret love. She calls it marriage, and with that word, she cloaks her sin. When the gods hear of Aeneas' love affair with Dido, they immediately reprimand him. Jupiter, pointing out that, quote, he seems to have quite forgotten in his infatuation the cities given him by fate, sends Mercury to tell Aeneas that in some he must sail. If he would not fulfill his responsibility for his own glory, he must for his son and for the future of Rome. When Aeneas heard Jupiter's command, he realized that despite his love for Dido, his greater responsibility was to found Rome. He bristled all over, speechless, astounded, and he burned with desire to leave that sweet land in awe of the commandment from the gods above. More than any personal passion was Aeneas's responsibility to live obedient to the laws of fate. He begins to prepare his fleet to set sail. Dido is furious, and she confronts Aeneas. "Traitor! Did you actually hope to conceal this crime and sneak away without telling me? Does our love mean nothing to you? Does it matter that we pledged ourselves to each other? If you had at least left me with child before deserting me, if only a baby Aeneas were playing in my hall to help me remember you, I wouldn't feel so completely used and abandoned." After this, the poet Virgil comments, "Cruel love, what do you not force human hearts to bear?" Although Aeneas expected Dido to be upset upon hearing that he planned to leave Carthage, Aeneas seems quite shocked by the depth of her fury. While he acknowledges that Dido has earned his gratitude, he denies marrying her, and he feels that rather than giving in to his own passion, his greater duty is to obey the gods, to honor his son's inheritance, and to live up to his destiny to found Rome. He concludes, "Stop wounding both of us with your pleas. It's not my own will. This quest is for Italy." Things do not end well for Dido. Dido, worn down by grief, went mad. She prepares a funeral pyre to rid Carthage of everything Aeneas had touched. She throws herself upon it, with a sword given to her by Aeneas. And as she's about to die, she looks upon the clothes he used to wear and upon their, quote, familiar bed. And Aeneas unfurls the sails of his ship and pulls away from shore, watching the flaming pyre from sea. In the final chapter of the Aeneid, our hero again faces a conflict between passion and duty, one that's quite different from the one he faced in the Dido story in chapter 4. As the battle rages on between the Romans and the native peoples of Italy, Aeneas, quote, ferocious in armor, confronts Turnus, who's killed Aeneas's best friend on the battlefield. By the way, while we're discussing this chapter, I'll be quoting from the Fagel's translation. My response to this section seems to be quite different from what a lot of people take from it, and I'm not sure why. After long battle, Turnus realizes that he has been vanquished by the powerful Aeneas. He lowers his eyes in defeat and begs Aeneas to save his life, or at least send his dead body to his family. Says Turnus, "I'll stretch my hands to you, so the men of Latium have seen me in defeat. Lavinia is your bride." That is, the land of Italy is now Rome. And then he continues, "Go no further down the road of hatred." Aeneas pauses for a moment, swayed by his natural desire to be compassionate. But right at this moment, he looks at Turnus's body and sees his dead friend's sword belt. He calls it a keepsake of his own savage grief. All of Aeneas's senses of reason and duty fly out of him as passionate anger takes over. Aeneas, quote, flaring up in fury, terrible in his rage, plunges his sword into Turnus's body. Turnus' limbs went limp in the chill of death. His life breath fled with a groan of outrage down to the shades below. And so ends the Aeneid. Aeneas leaves Dido in Carthage, despite his love for her, and her pleas for him to stay with her. It's only by abandoning his passions in the name of duty and self-control. But here at the end of the epic, in its very final sentences, Aeneas gives in to his passionate rage and kills Turnus. Instead of some wrapped-up Disney movie ending, we get the kind that sends us to the cafe for long conversations about what it all means, and maybe gives us nightmares. Is this just supposed to be a retelling of the Achilles Patroclus story? It feels bigger to me. In general, Virgil's epic glorifies the war, despite the acknowledgement that war always requires sacrifice. It's possible that a cool-headed Aeneas might have decided that the risk of letting Turnus remain alive might have been too great a threat to Rome. But Aeneas is not at all cool-headed in this moment of slaughter. And at least, if we're to believe him, Turnus accepts that he's lost. He's ready to completely accept his defeat in his desire to create peace. But Aeneas won't accept this move. Losing the people he loves seems to cause such deep sorrow for Aeneas that he can no longer respond with compassion, or even just with basic humanity. While he rejects the voice of passionate love, Aeneas causes the death of his beloved Dido. When he listens to the voice of passionate anger, Aeneas causes the death of not only Turnus, but he cuts off all chance of true peace. Out of Aeneas's uncontrolled rage comes empire. Only when we're able to turn people into the other and look down upon them and trick ourselves into believing that they are dangerous and have wronged us are we able to go to war and build our empires. Is empire ever created in any other way? Still, the ending of the Aeneid leaves my mind reeling. As I looked into interpretations of the final scene, I found that almost all traditional literary critics seem to emphasize the piety of Aeneas rather than his passion, even at the end of the book. It's Turnus that's portrayed as the out-of-control person, but I'm not convinced. I have some thoughts, some questions. First, perhaps the killing of Turnus is Virgil's articulation that responsibility, not emotional self-control, is most important. When one's duty conflicts with passion, as in the case with Dido, passion is wrong. But when duty dovetails with one's passions, there's nothing wrong with it. That is this really a story about passion versus stoicism, or just a story about living up to your fated role, no matter what, in this case, the role of founding the Roman Empire? Another question. What does Aeneas feel and do next? Does he regret killing Turnus in anger? And does he return the body to Turnus's family, as the young man has requested, allowing him to have an honorable death? If Virgil is assuming that Aeneas thought what he did was both pious, killing Turnus, and compassionate, sending the body back, does that change how we feel? Perhaps the reason this book has remained so relevant is because there's room for the reader to interpret in a variety of ways. The text makes room for interpretations which Virgil might never have considered. Or perhaps Virgil intended to teach us that people are complex and that what is right, even what is desired, is not always easy to ascertain. Any ideas? I'd love to hear what you think. Thanks for joining me today on my second stumble through the ancient world. See you soon on Hannah's Books.